Folks, joining me now, Senator Eric Schmitt, who's former Missouri Attorney General. Senator Eric Schmitt, welcome back to the show. Can I just ask you at the top, there's a lot to talk about, this idea that's floating in the newspapers, the Wall Street Journal, Peter Doocy referred to it, although we don't know what the Americans are saying, of a permanent truce. In other words, Israel is going to stop fighting and make a permanent truce with Hamas, and that's what the Qataris want, and I think the Egyptian diplomats are pushing for that. Really? Do you think that's realistic, or do you have a different view?
I think the Israelis need to do what they need to do to wipe out Hamas, and they need the diplomatic and moral cover from the United States and moral support to go do that. There's a couple things to put this in broader context, Larry, from just the last couple days. Senators were invited to a private screening of some of the horrific acts caught on video by the terrorists themselves, and not to get into too much detail, it's as brutal as you could imagine. And then today we had a briefing from an IDF general talking about what they're doing and how they're going about their business. This is an existential threat for Israel. And so any discussion from anybody about how they ought to handle this, I think, is way too premature. They need to be able to decide that, and the United States needs to allow them to go do that. I think we would expect the same. I mean, if we were attacked in that way, I wouldn't be looking for any go-aheads from anybody else. We would make sure that we wiped out the terrorists that killed American civilians. And so that's what's going on right now in Israel. So to me, they need to do what they need to do.
Yeah, I've always said that let Israel be Israel, let the IDF be the IDF, let them do their work. But, Senator Schmitt, you've got Democratic senators. I mean, on the Sunday talk show, Chris Murphy of Connecticut, of course, Bernie Sanders. You've got other Democrats who want to attach conditions to Israeli financial aid. I mean, it's kind of like fighting a war without any casualties. I mean, they want to butt in, and they're talking about micromanagement. And I think some people in the Biden administration are behind this.
Well, they're getting immense pressure from other Democrats and from the left to do this. You see these protests on the street, people chanting from the river to the sea. It's really disgusting, and I think the Democrats are caving to that. Joe Biden had a weird tweet last night about 2 states, and we need to make sure Hamas gets what it was very strange, very confusing, and at a really dangerous time to be saying things like that. So again, I think Democrats are talking about conditions on what Israel can and can't do is ridiculous. And so, but you also, Larry, at the same time we're having discussions about that. There was some discussion lead-in about what this supplemental might look like. You also have Chuck Schumer talking about the urgency of Ukrainian aid and making sure we secure their borders, right? And he doesn't want to deal at all with our open and porous southern border where there are millions of people coming across. There have been record months just in September and October of this year. We're hearing that next year there could be, because it's an election year, there could be, multiple times what we've seen even this year. We have to secure our border. The Democrats don't want to talk about that. As far as I'm concerned, they're fine with an open border. It's been Joe Biden's policy since day one, and this is the main issue that Americans care about. Well,
so I'm going to ask you, Speaker Mike Johnson was in your Senate Republican conference meeting today, and I wanted to ask you, because I know the issue of the supplemental was there, but I also know that some Republican senators just want to get the money out to Ukraine, and they'll give up on the border security, and particularly a change in policy. I mean, like, remain in Mexico or build the wall. I mean, can you tell us what was that conversation like with Mike Johnson, who I think represents H.R. 2 from the House, and the GOP senators?
Yeah, he was very clear, and I think most Republicans, there have to be really serious border reforms here. And by the way, I'm skeptical because I litigated the Biden administration when I was Attorney General on things like remain in Mexico. We had court orders, Larry, for them to secure their border, and they ignored the law. It's a lawless administration. So I'm skeptical that no matter what we do, that you're going to have an executive branch that actually wants to execute the law. That's issue number one. I think Senate Republicans, we tried last week or the week before Thanksgiving to bring up the Israeli issue by itself. That's my position. Let's deal with that issue one by one. If they want to deal with Ukraine, deal with it. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of concern right now that the Democrats aren't serious about the border. And I would hope, and my message to my Republican colleagues, I've been unapologetic about this, is let's support the House the Republican House and what they've passed with the Israeli issue and not side with Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden on this?
Well, apparently, Republican leader Mitch McConnell agrees with you, or at least he wants some kind of reforms for the border as part of this broad package. I think that's a good thing. I think you would agree with that. I guess my question is, where do we go from here? Is there going to be a clear Republican alternative? Is there going to be a cloture vote with 60 votes necessary? Will Republicans stop that without a clear change in border policy? Not just more money for babysitters or more money to expedite them coming in, the illegals coming in, but I mean a real change in policy. And then how much money does Ukraine get? I mean, Israel gets $15 billion. I think that's the easy part. How much does Ukraine get? Is there a way out of Ukraine? Is there an exit policy there? I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but they seem to all be tied up in this current discussion.
I agree with you, and I think that, like, for example, with the Israel issue, they have very clear objectives that are doable, that they can accomplish. There's broad political support for it. We've not heard anybody, people are advocating for more money for Ukraine. There is no clear objective. There's no certainty or even a belief that that can be accomplished right now. There's a lot of, I think of the American taxpayers that work hard every day, and do they want us sending our money into a forever war with no exit strategy, right? And so we have to ask these tough questions. So I think that these issues, why I think it's important for us to lay these things out one by one and get serious about this. But look, the Democrats aren't serious about the border. My concern is that we're going to end up with a situation where the people who want to fund Ukraine come up and say, voila, we found a border solution, and it's not real. We have to be serious about this. And if you're going to even have a discussion about that, you need measurable certainty. Like, actually, the border is closed. No more games, no more, hundreds of thousands of people every month. Actually get to where we were with President Trump, was where we had a secure border. It is our national security issue. So we can't be siding with Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer. Senate Republicans have to hold firm, deny cloture on this, and get serious. But we can take the Israel legislation up by itself. We should do that, and then deal with these other issues one by one. But again, I think it's imperative for Senate Republicans, again, to support the House and not side with Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer.
All right, Senator Eric Schmitt, as always, sir, thank you very much for coming on. We appreciate it. Thanks.
Good to be with you.